Hi, hi. My name is Ann V. Brady, and I will be reading from my book, A New Beginning: The Story of My Adoption, Life, and Service, illustrated by Eric C. Brady. Joe and I would go into the city to clubs like Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. There were themed restaurants and clubs. One time we tried out a new restaurant called Once Upon a Stove. It was a small restaurant. It was decorated with antique toys. In the windows were antique toys, carousels, and trucks. Inside were old photographs of celebrities, old posters, and toys. It had wonderful French cuisine. I used to enjoy teasing Joe. I once told him this joke: "Why are horses measured by hands instead of feet?" When he asked me why, I told him it was because it was easier to measure them by hands than laying on your back and measuring using your feet. When summer came, I took a physics class. I was surprised at how well I did. Whereas in high school I had gotten a C, this time I got a B. Occasionally I would take Joe out to Hampton Bays. I slept in the bedroom with Gran, and Joe slept on the couch in the living room. The only problem with sleeping in the bedroom with Gran was that she would get up in the middle of the night. She would try to cover me because she was convinced I was cold even in the summer. She usually would wake me up when she fell on top of me. She had no balance. Then she would go back to bed. We went to different local bars sometimes. During the day, we would go clamming using either our bare feet or a clam rake. Once we went to a bar called the Big Red Barn. It was a huge bar that had two bars. One bar was inside and the other was outside. When we first arrived, we went to order drinks. I ordered a rye and water. The bartender handed my drink. When I took a sip, it tasted funny. I told the bartender that I had ordered a rye and water. He told me, "I thought you ordered rye and wine." I figured the bartender must have been drunk or something, because who would ever drink rye and wine? It was awful. Tommy James and the Shondells were playing. I asked Joe about dancing, but he didn't want to be the first couple on the floor. I didn't care. I just wanted to dance. Tommy James chastised the crowd. He told them they were playing so people would dance. He told the crowd, "This isn't a concert, dance." So we all started to dance and had an enjoyable night. Sometimes my dad would go fishing with Bob and me. He always baited the hooks. He never caught any fish. He used to say he was the master baiter, Baitor. Jim and Joan had Colleen that summer. She was a beautiful girl with brown hair and eyes. She looked like Joan. Jim had given up smoking. He had gone to a hypnotist to quit. We were there visiting. When Jim and I were left alone, he told me that I could smoke if I wanted to. I told him no, that he might start smoking again. He said he was all right and it wouldn't affect him. 3 weeks later, he was back smoking. Joan had started to take piano lessons. She would get annoyed that she worked hard to learn to play the piano, and Jim would just sit down at the piano and play the song she was learning by ear effortlessly. The next summer course I took was called Microtechnique. It was how to make tissue slides. We learned how to make slides using a microtome to cut thin tissue samples of tissues embedded in paraffin wax. We would preheat a water bath, then at the proper temperatures, we would float the tissue samples until the paraffin wax would melt. Then we would put a glass slide underneath the tissue sample. We then learned different staining techniques. We used stains like acridine orange or eosin stains. We learned how to use the stains and how to reconstitute the stains. It was a hard course and very hands-on. I enjoyed it a lot. On weekends, I would spend my time in Hampton Bays, fishing and crabbing. Once my dad told me to leave my car at home and walk to the train station and take the train out to the Hamptons. He would pick me up. I took a small suitcase with me and a book that I was reading. I have always enjoyed reading. I mostly read murder mysteries, but occasionally I decided to read classics like the Iliad and the Odyssey. While I was reading on the train, a man asked if he could join me. I told him yes. He said that he was Richard Roundtree. I have seen Shaft, the movie, and the TV series. I looked at the man, but I didn't think he was Richard Roundtree, though he looked similar. I then figured if he was Richard Roundtree, he might look different without makeup. We talked until Hampton Bays when I got off the train. We had a small we had a small motorboat. It was attached to a radiator that was filled with water when we weren't using it. We would take the boat out to fish using either fishing rods or drop lines. One problem we encountered at times when fishing was that crabs would grab a hold of the hook. You could tell if it was a crab because the tug on the line is different than that of a fish. The crab would let go of the line as it hit the water line. We usually used worms or minnows at bait. We usually caught flounder or fluke. Sometimes we would catch sea robins. They are really strange looking fish. They are a medium sized fish, thin with fins that come out of the sides like wings. They have teeth on the bottom and they have tiny feet. They are poisonous, so if you touch them, you need to wear gloves. We tried one once, and you have to cut out the belly part of the fish, as that is the only part of the fish that is edible. We discovered it was a whole lot of effort for very little result. It wasn't bad, but when we caught the fish after having tried it, we would throw it back. When crabbing, we either used crab traps or we would stand by the bulwark and try to catch crabs. We would use a drop line with a metal hanger tied to the line. The hanger was modified by bending it into a circle and making a loop at one end to close the loop. We would put minnows on the loop and close it, then unravel the drop line, lower it into the water, and wait for a tug. We always had a net nearby to catch the crabs. Sometimes we would accidentally catch a fish that way. We would catch blue claw crabs. When we had enough, we would boil them in a giant pot in the kitchen. My dad started building his own mini golf course in the lawn. He would decide where to place the holes around the house and in the backyard. He would dig holes in the yard and place tin cans big enough for a golf ball to fit the holes. If you hit a ball too hard, it would end up in the bay. There were 5 holes and you played 2 holes twice. The picture I have below is of Dad and I are golfing. He's got a golf club in his hand. He's got a white shirt, baseball cap, and shorts on. And Tiana Bay is in the background. And behind me is a tree. And I'm wearing a t-shirt, looks like it's pink or red, with shorts. And we both have golf clubs. One day while I was crabbing, I caught an eel. We unhooked it, and my mom cooked it. It tasted like chicken. Jack and Elizabeth came down one weekend. Jack went fishing with my dad in our boat in the bay. Jack playfully pushed my dad off the boat into the water. Jack was frightened when my dad's hat floated on the water and there was no sign of my dad. My dad was an excellent swimmer. He held his breath and came to the surface, giving Jack much needed relief. Later that summer, Jack rented a charter boat to take my dad, Bob, and I tile fishing in the Atlantic Ocean off Montauk, Long Island. Everyone, including my dad, caught a fish. Over the Labor Day weekend, I went with my mom to the celebration on the Shinnecock Reservation. It's the only time the reservation is open to the public. Native Americans come from all across the country to participate in the celebration. We got to see the Native American dances, try Native food. I was amazed at how diverse the Native American people are. I saw whites and blacks who had Native American blood. We had a wonderful time. During the fall, I had to take a microbiology course. It was a year-long course divided into fundamentals of microbiology and medical microbiology. We learned how to make different types of agar, such as blood agar and makanki agar. We would autoclave the media to make it sterile. We also had to pour agar into tubes and keep them in the refrigerator. Sometimes we would have to melt the agar in the tubes to pour into agar plates. We would set up a coffee can filled with water and place it on steel mesh on a ring stand. We would light a Bunsen burner under the can. We had to stay by our station to make sure the agar melted and the water didn't totally boil away. If the water boiled away, the sterile gauze stoppers in the test tubes would pop out of the tubes and fly across the lab. We had a female student that constantly got into trouble because of that. She would leave her station while the water was boiling. She would talk to other students and forget about what she was doing. Several students were hit by flying test tube tops. The teacher finally laid down the law. She told the student if it happened one more time, she would be thrown out of class because she was a danger to the class. Another student had a different problem. He couldn't get bacteria to grow on any media. It turned out after he flamed his loop, he would use it before it had cooled when transferring bacteria from one plate to another. He was killing his bacteria. We learned how to use microscopes and how to take care of them. I also took general genetics. It was an interesting course. I only took the lecture and not the lab course. I thought it would be boring mating Drosophila flies. I had to turn in a paper on a disease or abnormality at the end of the term. I rewrote my high school paper on the RH factor. I left out the research that I performed on the teacher and students determining how many people were RH negative compared to RH positive. I didn't want to get a bad grade for handing in an old paper I had done. I got a fair grade. I also took organic chemistry lecture and lab. I did better in the lab than I did in the lecture. We learned how to make aspirin, acetylsalic acid. We made amines, alcohols, etc. At the end of the lab course, we had to identify 5 organic compounds. I like laboratory courses more than lectures. In the second semester, I took medical microbiology. We learned how to run tests and isolate and identify bacteria. We were also tested in all we learned. We had a lab book that the teacher had us use for preparing media and how to identify bacteria. We were given an assignment to try to grow a microorganism that we hadn't covered in lecture or lab. I found a section on how to grow an amoeba. I told the teacher what I had chosen. She told me if the amoeba didn't grow, I could fail the course. She wanted me to have a backup. I decided against the backup organism because I believed I could do it. I followed the recipe for media that grew amoebas. I asked my brother Jim for a dirty diaper. He gave one to me and asked no questions. I also took some soil from our backyard. I placed the soil and feces on the agar and incubated it at the proper temperature in an incubator. I waited several weeks and then looked under a dissecting microscope at the plate for signs of an amoeba. I thought I had found one, so I asked the teacher to look at it. I was looking at the wrong object under the microscope. Teacher found the amoeba and showed it to me. It was round, but it moved across the agar by extending a pseudopod that looked like a club foot. It was interesting to watch. Teacher had several different areas of microbiology we could choose to study further for the rest of the year. I decided to take creating a vaccine against a specific microbe. In organic chemistry lab, we had to make sure that we used a boiling chip in all procedures. This was to keep distillation beakers from exploding. One day, one of the students forgot to use boiling chips and distillation flask exploded. It scared everyone because it was unexpected. Cleanup was horrible. Sometimes the lab ran over and we would have to come in on weekends to finish. There were certain hours that the lab was open and on the week was open on the weekend. The teacher was there to supervise. And that's all I'm reading for today. I hope everybody enjoyed that and has a great weekend. Have a great rest of the day, and goodbye.